into it. Easy for you.
About 20 seconds away now.
Yeah, this is good.
Camera's in position.
We're just going to get you guys mic'd up.
And I have a lighter note story.
5 seconds to go.
You ready?
Okay, all quiet on the floor.
Welcome to a TRT World Special Roundtable, Women on War, reporting from the front line. I want to introduce Sue Turton, Zaina Awad, Shelley Kittleton, Arwa Damon, and Nicole Johnston. I'm Stavroula Logothetis, and ladies, thank you for coming to the table.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to start off by saying that you go to the most dangerous parts of the world, and you risk your lives to get the story for your audiences or your readers. Why do you do it? Arwa, why do you do it?
I think a lot of us are driven by an almost visceral need to go out there and get as close to the story as you possibly can, because it is only in doing that, in getting as close to the experiences of the people that are going through the war, whether it's civilians or soldiers, that you can then translate that into something that is going to generate a reaction from your audience.
Yeah, I think also we're looking at us being war correspondents, but it's usually a growth. You've progressed. You've done journalism in all sorts of walks of life. And certainly for me, I thought, okay, if I'm going to give my life continually to this profession, because you have to give your whole life, you're in or you're out, you want to do it for stories that matter. And it's this kind of story. It's conflict. It's where there is the very worst happening in somebody's life that you want to try and show what's happening, to try and help, really. So I think if you look at the seriousness of the sorts of areas that we cover, it's more that, I think, than wanting to go into somewhere where, you know, the bombs and bullets are flying.
And I think I have a slightly different view. I think for me, I never, ever expected that I'd be doing this sort of thing. I never really thought that I'd end up going to these sorts of places. I knew nothing about the Middle East. I'd never been there. I'm from Australia. It's a long way from here. And I mean, it's as simple as I just loved telling stories. And whether it was, you know, simple stories in Australia about people, as Sue said, you know, it just sort of grew from there.
Actually, I wanted to talk about the element specifically of that, which is the storytelling. I think that the drive, I think there's sort of almost a moral commitment to trying to tell stories and a recognition that, you know, I am privileged enough that I can do that. I think is what drives a lot of us. And I think in the moment, yeah, okay, we can qualify it as dangerous, as, you know, you're taking a risk on your life. But the reality is that the real danger are the people that you're reporting on or with.
I definitely agree, especially coming from a community that I feel was forgotten in some sense. I mean, rural America. I come from a farm. We lost our farm when I was young because of debt, etc. So, I mean, I think that I identify with these people quite a lot, and I'd like to actually tell their stories and try to get that out a bit more. I understand what it means to be stuck somewhere, and I can empathize quite a lot. And also the element of documenting history, especially as a writer. I think that it's important that we get certain details down, and you can't do that unless you actually go there.
Yeah.
My next question to you is your first time being deployed into a conflict zone.
My first job, actually.
Really? Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's 2003. I was a freelancer. The war in Iraq was just gearing up. Because I'm Syrian American, I spoke Arabic, and it was literally the clash of both of my cultures. And I felt, because I look so American, that I could perhaps tell a story that appears on the surface and is to a certain degree quite complicated. The Middle East, especially what's happening in Iraq and all of the underlying dynamics there, I felt that I could tell that to a Western/American audience. And so I ended up in Iraq just a couple of weeks before the war began in 2003, and then it kind of moved on from there, and I never left.
Well, I guess the first time I spent a long time in a conflict area, for most of the time that I was there, you know, there was no war going on as such. I went back to Gaza, you know, during the 2012 and 2014 war, but I lived there for a year. So it's sort of interesting when you go into a conflict area at a time when there is no conflict. Yeah. You know, a lot of the time we are going into places, and, you know, even at the moment you could go into Mosul on a particular day or afternoon and it could be quiet for a few hours. So it's always that sort of strange feeling. But I guess what that left me with, you know, more than your first experience being going straight into a war, was, you know, going in and getting to know the people and to see how they live and to, you know, form connections with people and to spend your Friday afternoons, you know, with families, having their Friday lunch. And I guess, you know, even now when I go out into the field, that's the part that I enjoy most.
The first time I was actually in a conflict zone was when I went into Syria in 2012. It's a completely different story, clearly. There were bombs falling after I came out. For a while, I would immediately, whenever I heard a plane overhead, because clearly it was only the regime that had an air force, I would, without thinking, just try to look for somewhere that I could hide. But yeah, no, so the first conflict zone, let's say, is Syria.
How do you prepare for deployment? How do you prepare emotionally, physically, mentally?
As far as emotionally, I don't think I ever prepare emotionally. You just go, what's the story? How are we going to find out? And on you go, you know. You don't even sit there going, oh my word, you know. And I think it's the best that you don't have time.
You probably don't always have time to prepare emotionally, because a lot of the times it's sort of it's quite a fast turnaround. But there are basic things that I always take with me, and they're, you know, in relation to personal care, and you know, clothing, that kind of stuff. And then when I'm in the field, I actually, even though the days are extremely long, I am in regular touch with my family, even if it's a simple WhatsApp.
I did, though, at one point end up writing a letter to my parents before going into Bab Ahmed in Syria in 2012, mostly to my mom, not so much for me, but for them, because I think it's really hard for our families to understand why, because it's such a choice. When you deliberately put yourself, you know, in danger, they need to understand why, and for some of them, it becomes, well, what about us? Like, my mom said to me actually before this last Mosul trip, she sent me a message that, Arwa, please have mercy on the souls of people who love you. And you don't really realize the impact that what you do has on family.
On that, I'd like to ask, when you're doing this, and some of you have touched on it a little bit, how do you transition out of the war correspondent into the person? How do you balance that?
I think, I mean, at least for me, you know, there's an overlap in personality. I don't think it's a transition from like one persona into another.
Yeah.
I like to think that I'm kind of the same, at least, to a certain degree. Of course, then it is a transition from, you know, one mindset being in the field to being back home or wherever it is that you go to kind of unwind, or whatever it is that they like to call it these days. You kind of get used to it after a while, though. You know, like you're used to the emotions. You're used to the cycle that you're going through, and because you become used to it, you know how to better handle it. Like, I know after a really rough assignment, I should probably go off and be on my own for a while, which is fine.
I kind of think of it as almost taking your mental body armor off. You know, just wear a flat jacket. You kind of protect yourself when you're in these environments, and it's like Arwa says, you know what's coming. You know what you're going to have to deal with, and some's worse than others.
Each assignment you go on, you leave a little bit of yourself there.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Each one takes something away from you.
Like what?
A certain part of you always stays behind. And I think, you know, each time you go out, each time you put on your body armor, or even if you don't, each time you go out and you talk and spend time with a family, and you recognize that you get to go back to your privileged life, and they're still there, a part of you stays with them. So each time you go, you do lose a little bit more of yourself.
I think that's a great point, and I completely agree with that. And I would also say that, you know, Nicole was mentioning within the context of the Middle East, the hospitality, or just people's hearts are open to you even when they have nothing. And I think that you leave a piece of you behind, but sometimes with specific individuals I've met along the way as a journalist, I feel like they have become a part of me as well.
Definitely.
And they've also helped me evolve in a really strange way, either by shifting perception or by doing something very simple sometimes that just makes my day. I asked him how life is, and he said it's very difficult, and it's actually quite cold at the moment. He's saying he's 62 years old. His son has died in Syria, so he's responsible for this whole family, but he can't work, and he has to now send the kids out to work.
Does gender play a part in the stories you can get to that maybe your male counterparts can't?
Yeah.
In Afghanistan, they call us the third sex.
Why?
Because we're not male and we're not like Afghani females, but even the Taliban needs to talk to you if they want to get their message across on whichever channel you work for. So they have to be able to talk to you. So they sort of class you as this odd sex that doesn't fit into what they think you should, the behaviour you should, you know, be at the kitchen sink or whatever.
In Libya last year, we arrived at this petrol station where we're going to sleep for the next few days, and I'm with the male team, and there's only one room with air conditioning.
Didn't you?
And they wanted to give the room to our crew, which was, you know, wonderful and hospitable of them. So I thought the whole crew, we'd all stay in there. And then even the crew decided that they'd sleep outside. They said they preferred the breeze. There wasn't that much of a breeze. And so I ended up with the whole room to myself.
That's,
That's awesome.
That's a great story.
That doesn't happen very often.
Wait, and you took it?
What a nice group.
We had air conditioning.
I mean, I think just drawing on my own personal experience, I think I've done quite a number of pieces. I've reported quite extensively on sexual violence in conflict zones in war areas. You know, be it in Iraq, among Syrian refugees, South Sudan. I think if I was a male, I would have had a much harder time getting those kinds of stories. Now, when it comes to men, I think it's much more complex than that. Because I think it depends, it's very contextual. It's premised upon also what ethnic background you come from. It's not just your gender, what color you are, what languages you speak. And, you know, I've had situations like Sue said, where I was very much seen as a third sex and in a way given a free pass and access. But I've had other situations where there was a constant cloud of sexual tension hanging over. And especially, and I find that particularly with powerful men, be they members of parliament, be they tribal leaders, whatever it is, that element is there as well. So I think it's so difficult it's kind of not black and white, I find, with stories that involve men, but definitely when it comes to gender and women and girls' stories, it's been easier for sure being a female.
And then you think how great it would be if you had an all-female team on occasion, which almost never happens.
I've had that once, actually.
Yeah, it's happened to me once,
US.
one trip in 20 years. But all the time, you know, we're going with a male cameraman or maybe a male field producer, male fixer, and you're thinking, well, why is it that we never have an all-female team? Because imagine the access that you could get then, because sometimes you're female, so you can go in, you can speak to the women, you can get certain things, but they may not want a male cameraman there, or they may not, you know, if there's interpretation, they may not be comfortable speaking with the local male fixer. And that's when you're thinking, well, it'd be great if we hired more women in those sorts of positions, because I think you have, you know, probably maybe now just as many female correspondents as male, or maybe a little bit less. I don't know, it seems like there's a lot, but you're always going out with these male heavy teams, largely, I think.
This is a last push by the fighters against Daesh in Sirte. They've been battling the group since May. They've encountered fierce resistance, snipers, explosive devices. The group is pinned down a few hundred meters behind us in one small part of the city.
Shelley, you go out on your own for much of your work, right?
Yeah.
How is
definitely.
your experience different from these women who actually have a team?
It gives me more access in certain cases. In some cases, it's more dangerous, but I would say that the element of the fact that it's unexpected does work in my favor quite a lot. Going in a shared taxi from, I don't know, Kunduz to Kabul, you couldn't do that as a team, but I have done that as a lone journalist, let's say. And you also get to watch people without them really watching you quite so much. Clearly, I mean, I'm not Afghan, but I can blend in quite a lot more than I could with a huge, camera.
What situation would you not put yourself into now that you would have just forged ahead when you first started out?
I would have just turned down any suggestion of a mission to Egypt, personally.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me about that. So let's talk about that. Yes.
We were in and out of Egypt after the coup, myself and various other correspondents, including Nikki when she was working for Al Jazeera. And there was a clampdown of all the press at the time. And unfortunately, at the end of the year, the only journalists that were really still reporting regularly and having an impact still in Egypt, because Al Jazeera was being broadcast in Egypt, was the journalists for Al Jazeera English. And so 3 guys were locked up in prison, and a number of us were also accused of being members of a terrorist organisation, and we were convicted that following summer of terrorist offences. And most of us still have those terrorist offences now, although the 3 guys that were locked up for 400 and odd days are now out. But, you know, that was nothing to do with our reporting, and it was everything to do with Qatar and Egypt falling out. And albeit, you know, having that offence doesn't stop me working, it has had quite an impact on the places that I can go. And obviously it took their liberty away for a long time, so the impact on them has been huge.
There's been a few things that I think, looking back, I probably wouldn't do again. Probably the first thing that came to my mind, because it was one of my first deployments as a reporter, probably 2006, 7, something like that, was kind of retracing the journey of Zimbabwean refugees who were fleeing Zimbabwe into South Africa. And sort of at the break of dawn, retrace the whole thing, including walking through the Limpopo River, which they crossed, which is infested with all sorts of things. So I probably wouldn't do that for public health reasons. And it was technically an illegal crossing, because, I probably wouldn't go down a tunnel in Gaza again as well. That was probably one of the stupidest things I've done. I can go on. I mean, I went into a school battle in Lebanon without a flak jacket. That was the stupidest thing as well.
Regrets, I've had a few. But
Yeah, I mean,
But that's the thing, so each of those experiences have then taught you something.
yeah.
they have, absolutely. And as you said, we're the sum of all of that. We're absolutely, that's the thing, where it's like, I feel like we're a work in progress. Every time you're deployed, you come back altered in some way or another, hopefully for the better.
Listen to you women talk about the field. It's exciting. At the same time, it scares the heck out of me. But
As it should.
Yeah,
No, as it
exactly,
should.
exactly.
I fundamentally believe that everybody who goes out there needs to have fear. And I'm not talking about that crazy out of control fear. I'm talking about very controlled fear, awareness of the danger. Because the minute you stop respecting the danger, the minute you stop feeling fear, that's when there is a very real likelihood that a mistake is going to happen that's going to cost you your life. You have to respect the danger. You have to have controlled fear.
Our vehicle takes more fire. Soldiers shoot at a motorbike racing towards us. It's hit. We hear the hiss of a tire losing air. We realize we're trapped. Vehicles, wreckage, everywhere. Our MRAP takes a direct hit.
How much has the industry changed from when you first started?
It's a long time ago.
I'm not that old. No, I'm just kidding, I am.
No, but how has it changed?
I think storytelling has evolved a lot since I've started as a journalist.
How?
I think primarily social media. It's completely, I think, changed dynamics. Because when I first started, it was all about writing to pictures. It was all about having a main narrative that you pin everything onto. It was classical television making in many ways. It was that. Now it's about, if you're in the right place, how do you shoot your Snapchat? Now it's about, linking your Instagram to your Facebook it's just a completely, the focus has kind of shifted on what would be valued when I started, a while ago, to where we're at now. And I think that's been, and I find myself still playing catch up, by the way. I'm just like,
Yeah, I think I'm still
every
stuck
day
in
there's
old
like
school.
a new
Like,
app.
I'm like,
like it in
Snapchat,
old
what?
I would love it in old school. Like now they have all these apps you got to worry about,
And it's very
LinkedIn.
time consuming.
It is.
It just, adds to an already huge, long, exhausting day of news gathering and lives, and then thinking, oh, I should do some social media on either end of it.
But also, fake news is
that.
such a thing at the moment, you know, and everybody is saying, well, how do we make sure we can rely on what we're either retweeting or what we're reading out there? And in the end, I'm hoping it's going to come full circle, and they'll say we need to know where it's coming from, whether, you know, I'm retweeting or whatever. That what I'm retweeting is actually true, and it's not being popped there by.
But haven't
the
you
Kremlin.
found that you now double check, even when you're retweeting
Totally.
from someone who you trust, you're double checking where it is that the story that they've tweeted out is actually sourced from in and of
But
itself?
we're journalists, you know. I'm talking about people. How do they know what's true and what's not?
But they don't. That's the problem. And I guess, you know, you just keep trying to focus on what it is that you're doing. Like the best way that we have to kind of combat this fake news phenomenon is just kind of keep trucking on and doing what it is that we're doing.
We're getting close to the end, so I want to ask you this question. What narrative are we not hearing about that you would like us to hear about beyond, you know, the bombs, the bodies?
It's so hard. It's the human narrative, which I think we all touched on. It's the people who make you tea, get you water. It's the families you find sitting on top of rubble. That's the real story. And when the bam bam is over, right? But it's so hard because there are ratings, there's competition, there's short attention span, there are limited budgets, there's top news. If it bleeds, it leads. That's so. How do you balance it all
To
out?
go
It's
beyond all
hard.
that, actually, because I think we ask all of ourselves that same question, especially those of us who've covered kind of these war zones where there's been viewer fatigue, as they call it. And I think that burden's actually on us. It's on us to figure out how to keep the story relevant and to how to make those small human connections between the people who are experiencing these atrocious things that we can't even imagine and the viewer. And if one thing's not working out, it's on us to go and figure out something that is. And I might not have the answer for that right now. I do know the moments that I would love to capture are those things that kind of happen on the side where the camera's not rolling, where you think to yourself, if someone else could just live this for 5 minutes, they would just understand. But again, it's on us. We need to figure that out.
What is that one story that when you close your eyes, you cannot wipe it from your memory?
You know, I remember going into Shajaia in Gaza. Once you were able to go back into Shajaia and we were doing lives on top of the rooftop and the whole neighborhood is completely destroyed. It's the middle of Ramadan and this little boy comes up to the live spot with, you know, buckets of water that his father had brought up for us. You know, even though their house and their shop had been destroyed, they'd sort of scavenged for that. So that's the, you know, the incredible part that stays with you, I guess.
And I mean, I've lost count the number of refugee women in Iraq, in Gaza, and the Palestinian refugee camps of Lebanon, in Jordan, who have literally handed me a baby and said, take him or her with you to Canada. They'll have a better life.
Shelley, yeah.
Quite a few people in Syria stay with me in some form. There was a family that I stayed with quite a few times in Aleppo, opposition held Aleppo. And I generally stayed in the room with the little girls. And two of the little girls, one was around, I think, 7 and one maybe 4. And the one who was 7 had been hit by a sniper on her way to school, like maybe a month before I arrived the first time round. Later, she ended up leaving with her father on a boat to Europe, whereas the rest of the family ended up staying in opposition held Aleppo, so it was the mother and a few children. But the younger daughter, the one who was around 4, would always wake up before I would, whenever a bomb would hit and the ground would shake. And I would wake up and she would be looking at me. I mean, her eyes will stay with me forever. I mean, those little girls' eyes, I don't know even if I assume that she slept at some point in the night, but whenever a bomb hit, she would be there and she would be looking at me, you know, and that stays with you. But.
Unfortunately, I have to end it. I could go on for another 2 hours with you. I want to thank you very much, each and every one of you, and I wish you all the best with your careers. Thank you.
Thank you
very much.